We're back out at the big lake, and today it's all about winter bass fishing with Texas rigs. We're going to cover how, when, where, what, and why, so stick around. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing, and as you can see, we're back out here at the big lake to do a little bit of fishing. Now, as we've talked about before, locating bass is the #1 key. You're not going to catch fish that just aren't there. But what happens after you locate the bass? Well, after you locate the bass, where you find them is a huge determining factor in what kind of lure you need to throw. For example, you can see that the lake is about halfway to drawdown. That makes it a lot more shallow. In this area, I'm not going to be throwing a square bill or deep diving crankbait. If the fish are in there, I'm going to have to fish shallow and I'm going to have to fish slow. So we've located bass in this little pocket. It's shallow and it's full of vegetation. Well, that leaves us with a couple of choices. So that means we're probably going to be fishing some sort of soft plastic, and it's going to have to be relatively weedless. Well, that's going to rule out something like a shaky head or a Ned rig, because while those baits are great presentations, they're better suited for a hard bottom. That 90-degree line tie, as we've talked about before, does not come through vegetation very well. So that leaves us with the good old Texas rig. And today we'll be going through 3 different sorts of setups that I use when fishing this type of water with a Texas rig. We'll go through my baitcaster setup, which tends to be a little bit heavier, and we'll go through 2 finesse presentations that I use. Now today we're not going to be covering my punching setup because, well, we're not going to be doing anything like that today, and for the most part, the punching bite really isn't going to be on for much of the winter as that vegetation dies back and those fish are looking for different places to hold up for the winter. So let's get out here and get to fishing, and I'll show you what I mean. So as you can see here, I have 3 different rods rigged up, and we'll be Texas rigging baits on all of them. On my bait caster here, I've got a little bit heavier, more heavy duty setting. It's got a 1/4 ounce bullet weight, and I've got a glass bead in there just to add a little bit of clack. We've got a 4/0 EWG, little heavier gauge hook on there, and I've got 12-pound fluorocarbon on there, and this is a 7:1 gear ratio reel. This is on a medium heavy with a fast tip. This is a do-it-all rod, but it's also great for Texas rigging, and that's what I use it for a lot of the time. Now, moving over, we've got one of my finesse presentations. This is a spinning combo, and it's also got a 4/0 EWG, but instead it's got an 1/8 ounce bullet weight on it, and I've got 10-pound braid, freshly spooled up, that I'm running to a monofilament leader. And the reason why I do that is because I want just a little bit of extra stretch. That allows that bass to inhale that bait a little bit more, so when I'm setting the hook, I'm not just blowing that bass's mouth open and pulling the bait out of it. I find that it gives me much better hookup rates when I do that. And finally, we've got what's going to be a weightless presentation. I've got a 3/0 worm hook on there. It's not EWG. On the same 10-pound braid to a monoliter, but this is a medium light rod. This is a 7-foot medium light with a moderate tip. This is the softest one of all. I will be using this for extra finesse presentations depending on what type of situation, what type of mood the fish are in. So with these 3 Texas rig setups, I should be able to cover most of the bases, most of the ways that I can present different types of soft plastics in a Texas rig manner. Okay, now when it comes to gear and terminal tackle, what am I working with? Well, I will actually go anywhere from, this is a 1/16 ounce worm weight, 1/8, 3/16, all the way up to a 1/4 on my standard normal Texas rigs. Now if I'm punching, flipping, I will obviously use anywhere from a 3/4 ounce and a half, 2 ounce. But for normal standard Texas rig, just dragging a worm, these are going to be the weights that I'm using if I'm putting a weight on there. Now, okay, so what types of hooks am I using? Well, this guy here is a 4/0 EWG. It's a little bit more stout because I'm fishing through some pretty heavy slop. I've got it tied on with a regular Palomar knot. Sometimes I'll use a double pitsin, but this time I just used a regular Palomar knot. I like an EWG, especially if I'm fishing in thicker slop. I like, as you can see here on this one, I've already got it pre-rigged. I like using an EWG. I feel like when that fish bites it and that hook separates, I've got more of a gap right here. So that allows more of the hook to get into the fish. I've got all this area here, and I don't have the worm really getting in the way, so I actually feel like I'm getting a better hookup. You may prefer just a regular worm hook that's not extra wide gap, something like this guy here. Let me go ahead and get it out of the pack, and I can show you. This is just a regular offset worm hook. It's not an extra wide gap. This is a 3/0. It's a little bit lighter gauge. I use this mainly on my light finesse spinner. A lot of times if I'm throwing a weightless stick bait or a weightless Texas rig presentation, this is something that I will go with if I'm really trying to go super finessey. This tends to work really well for me. And it's the worm or the creature bait or whatever it is you're using, they're all rigged on there the exact same way. And I'm sure, let me get a worm out here, and I'm sure you've seen how to do it a million times. We'll go ahead and wet the hook just a little bit. Make sure you have the fat part, the flat part of the worm this way and the tip this way, and you'll just put it in there and go past that barb. Pop it out, push that hook through, and then turn it until you've got it on the eye like that. We'll hold it out like this, and we're going to use the bottom of the hook right here, and we're going to have that even up, and we'll push the worm up until we meet that part and push it through. We want to make sure that we're straight. We want to make sure that we're straight when we're going through that. So we want to have everything here aligned, and then we'll just push it up in and in like that, text pose that hook. That's as straight as we can get it, and there's your presentation. Obviously we would tie this on some form of line, 12-pound fluorocarbon, 10-pound braid, whatever you have, and this would work for any sort of presentation, such as if I had a, say I'm doing this, I've got this structure bug here, and say I want to go ahead and rig it. Well, even if the hook is different and the bait is different, I'm doing it the exact same way. I'm going to go ahead and push it up past that barb, pop the hook out. I'm going to slide it up, and I'm going to twist it around and get it up onto that shank. I'm going to measure out my gap, measure out my distance there, and I'm going to push the hook up and on. And I'm going to try to make sure I'm coming through that crease. That crease right there. It's very imperative that we get it straight. Now, this has got that divot in there, so you can leave it like that and it'll still be pretty weedless, but I still like to text pose it anyway. And that, a beaver style bait, a baby brush hog style bait, or whatever, is going to be rigged on here the exact same way. And you just fish it, the steps and mannerisms that I was showing you before, dragging the worm, and there you go. It really does work. It's a truly effective 365, 24/7 presentation that you can use anywhere. Now, with the lake being on drawdown like this, as the water recedes, you can see that it opens up so much of the bank. So you can essentially, especially when the lake is completely on drawdown, when it's all the way down, and we're probably about a third of the way there, not quite half of the way there at this point, but you can fish, literally walk around the entire lake. The entire bank is exposed. Now you have to be careful because, I mean, it's all mucky. I mean, it doesn't ever really dry. But that's because it's been underwater for however many decades, right? But if your lake goes on drawdown, I encourage you, get out there and fish it, especially if you're a bank angler. I have, from time to time, I've been asked, you know, if you've got such a nice bass boat, if you love your bass buggy so much, why are you constantly fishing from the bank? And the answer for that is inclusiveness. Because a great part of my audience, a large part of the viewers of this channel, don't have a boat. They don't have a way to get out there in the water like that. They may not want one. So I want these fishing tips to include everyone, for any angler, regardless of age and regardless of whether they have a boat or not. to be able to get out there on the water, apply these tips, and have them work. That's why you really don't ever see me do a lot of videos on things like deep diving cranks, square bills, things like that. I want to focus on things that you can do from a boat or from the bank. I want everyone to be able to do it. You'll see a lot of times some channels will do videos on these are the best baits for forward-facing sonar. Well, that right there rules out pretty much everybody without a boat. I don't want to do that. I want you to be able to watch any of my videos and say, I can do that, I can try that, even if I don't have a boat. Now, is that going to apply for everything 100% of the time? No, sadly, it will not. A lot of times I'm going to be doing videos from the bass buggy, and if you don't have access to some of those waters, well, it's just going to be hard for you to do. But I do strive very hard to make a concerted effort to include boat anglers and bank anglers in every one of my videos. Now, when I first start fishing, I want to start as finessey as possible. So we're going to start with the weightless first. And I've got a more natural color worm on there. And the reason why I'm doing that is because that worm is going to fall more slowly, which means that those bass are going to get a longer look at it. It's not going to be as much of a reaction strike as it would be with a heavier weighted worm. And we've just got to let that sink. Patience is the key here. It's quite a bit, it's quite blustery today. We've got a good bit of wind. So a weightless presentation may not be a really good choice from right here. We may want something, because we've got a good bit of wind today. So I don't know if the weightless presentation is going to work. So like I said, we're in the process of elimination to begin with. I like to start with as finessey as I can and go from there. And if this wind stays pretty high, all that's going to do is blow the bait across that way, and the bait won't really sink. And we're going to need it to sink. But you can see all of that hydrilla. As I've said before, this place is just essentially a lawn. But we have to be exceptionally patient whenever we're fishing a weightless presentation. But again, I'm going to start with something lighter and more finesse whenever it's colder out like this, because I want to see how active those fish are and what it is that I can get away with. But as you can see, even though that's just a small, regular, light wire worm hook, I can cast it out there a good ways because I've got this finesse set up. Alright, now I'm working that other presentation. It's got the 1/8 ounce bullet weight on it, and none of this is pegged. And I'm working this worm. I've got a darker worm. It's going to fall much more quickly in the water. So a lot of times I want a darker color when it does that, so we can elicit that reaction bite. That worm will drop by much more quickly, and we can stay down deeper in the water column. And that's how we're going to work this. But it's actually pretty chilly out here today. It's probably about 45 degrees in the sun. The water's fairly clear, pretty clear. It's not crystal clear or gin clear, but we've got quite a bit of visibility. In this shallow pocket, you should be able to see to the bottom fairly easily. But again, when I am choosing what type of Texas brig presentation I want to start with, whether I want to start with something weightless or something a little bit heavier, I'm going to try to start with as light a presentation as I can get away with, especially when the day is cooler, when it's chillier out. Those fish, you know, they may be finicky, they may be a bit more lethargic. Get out of that grass. So you don't know what it is that they want. So it's always better, in my opinion, to start a little bit lighter and then go from there. If they're biting something, if they're hitting it pretty hard and they're actually fairly active, then you could probably get away with fishing something a little bit more heavy, a little bit more aggressive. But as we've said before, a shaky head is not going to work in this particular situation. Something like a shaky head or a Ned rig would never work in any of that. You would do nothing but pull back a big mop head full of slop on your hook every single time. And it's not because the bait is weedless. That has nothing to do with it. It's the line tie. The line tie on a shaky head or a Ned rig is what hooks and grabs the weeds. So you need something that's in line. And a lot of times, it's a good old stick bait. So, and that's what, a lot of times that's what the fish, a lot of times that's what's just going to work whenever you're fishing heavier weeds. Okay, so when am I using this heavier setup, this 1/4 ounce setup? And as you can see, I've got a Strike King structure bug on there. Well, usually two reasons. One of them is going to be, how active are the fish? If the fish are feeling more active and they're showing me that they're more active, then a lot of times I can get away with running a heavier weight. I don't have to be as subtle with the presentation. I don't have to hold that bait in front of their face as long in order to get them to react to it. Okay, but another time is whenever it's exceptionally windy. Now today we've got a good bit of wind, so I want to use just a bit heavier bait, because the wind will also play a huge factor in what I can throw and how I can throw it. If I've got a lot of wind, clearly a weightless presentation is not going to do me much good. You cannot be of the mind that this is what I'm going to throw, this is what I'm going to use. Can you catch fish doing that? Well, I'm sure you can, but a lot of times you're just going to be missing bites. You've got to let the conditions and the fish tell you what they want, what's going to work. And you can spend 10,000 hours watching every fishing YouTube video out there, but sometimes you just got to get out on the lake. There is no substitute for time on the water. There is no substitution for experience. I can tell you till I'm blue in the face about how to work a Texas rig, how to rig them, how to use them, but at the same time, you're going to have to get out on the water and work with it. Every video is just a stepping stone. Okay, now what types of retrieves? Well, we've got some options when it comes to that. What I'm going to do first of all is obviously cast it out there. And I'm going to let it soak. Now I like to wind the slack out of my line just a little bit because I'm using braid, and braid is very wispy. It's like spider silk. So the wind is going to carry it. And if I'm making targeted casts, I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I've got quite a bit of slack in my line, and I'm just going to give it a couple of hops. When I feel tension, I'm pulling the slack out. When I feel tension, I'm just going to shake it a couple times. I'm not trying to put any real force into it. Then we'll let it sit, and let it sit back down on the bottom. Give it a couple more pops. Let it sit back on the bottom. Kind of give it couple of pops. Again, when I feel tension, when I feel that slack coming out of the line, I'm not really trying to pull any further this way. I'm just kind of popping it a couple of times. And then we're going to let it sit. That is one way that you can fish a Texas rigged worm. Another thing, like I said, I'm going to let it sink. I'm going to let it go all the way down, and then we can just pick up on it and let that worm drag. Let it sit, let it soak. Pick up on it, let that worm drag. Let it sit, let it soak. And you can give it a couple hops every once in a while, but those are going to be two of your main retrieves. Just kind of pick up on it like that and drag that worm to you. Pick up on it like that and drag that worm to you. Those retrieves are very, very effective, especially when the weather gets cold, that water temperature gets down, and those fish can become extremely lethargic. And everywhere I go back here in this little pocket, there's going to be hydrilla. I'm winding it down because I'm not trying to let the wind blow my string. Like if I'm trying to make an extremely targeted cast or a highly targeted cast, I very much just want that string to lay down in the water where the wind can't blow it as much. Now you've got current in the water and that's going to carry it, but it won't be as much of a factor as the wind would. So just kind of work your retrieves nice and slow. The overall key is going to be patience. Well, there you have it. Wintertime bass fishing with the Texas rigs. We covered different setups, different hooks, different weights, different ways I like to throw them, different retrieves, and pretty much everything in between. I think you will find that they're an effective presentation on pretty much any body of water. And I'm sure using these techniques, you'll be able to catch more fish. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.